So the functionality that features provide for declaratively defining and creating lists is useful, but sometimes the static nature of XML means you need more tools at your disposal to more fully exploit the power of lists and libraries. And fortunately, just like we would expect, the core SharePoint assembly does contain a robust set of classes that allow us to automate lists and their contents. So there is a great deal we can accomplish in code with a relatively small number of classes. So the SP list collection, so that's familiar by the web.lists property, and then when you want an individual list, that's SP list. And then there's a SP document library, which is synonymous with a document library. It represents a document library. And then the list item collection, obviously, those are all the items in a list. So when you iterate a list, you're actually iterating the SP list item collection. And then each individual item in that list item collection is an SP list item. And then, of course, with the views, with a list, you have views, and so each one of those views is represented by the SP list view object. And SP content type represents a content type, and we've already seen this before, but the SP field represents, it's analogous to a field. Each SP web instance, as we've already seen, does have that lists property, which is the SP list collection. And some of the SP list instances are actually document libraries. So when you iterate all the lists in a site, like we did in our web part, you might have noticed that some of the document libraries showed up. That's because document libraries are lists, but they just happen to be a list of type SP document library. And in fact, you can actually, once you get a list, you can test to see if it is an SP document library or not. And both the SP list and the SP document library, they expose their items via the items property, which is the SP list item collection. And then, again, each item in that collection is the SP list item. So when you need to access a list within a page context, maybe you're in a custom list form, you can get the current list or the current list ID from the SP context.current. But there might be other situations, maybe you're in a feature event receiver, for example, where you need a list instance via the containing web. And therefore, the SP web class has the SP web.list collection. And so that gives us the collection, and then if we know the list ID, we can get the list using the list ID. So that SP list collection has an indexer that accepts list ID and it accepts title. So it's either a GUID or a string. So if you pass in a GUID, it's expecting that to be a list ID. If you pass in a string, it's going to do a lookup and try to find a list with the matching title. And then there's also a GetList method that you can pass in this is kind of convenient because you can pass in a URL that points directly to the list, or actually any of the forms that the list is using. It could be either an absolute or site relative URL, and that will also get an instance of the list. So right now we'll go ahead and open up Visual Studio again, and we'll look at retrieving list instances using the SharePoint object model. Okay, I'm going to open up Visual Studio 2012. I'm going to create a new project. Actually, I'm going to actually run Visual Studio 2012 as administrator first before it prompts me. So I'll open it up as administrator. I'm going to create an empty SharePoint project. I'm going to call it List Demos. And it's a farm solution. Okay, I'm going to add a web part to this. And I'm going to call it List Viewer. And I'm going to go ahead and write some code for the create child controls method. So I'm going to create an instance of I'm going to add controls to the page. I'm going to use the literal control. So we can just put in some literal text. I'm just going to print out the list title and the list ID, and then we'll add an HTML break element. It's a line break, so it looks decent. Let's just bring this down here so you can see it a little bit better. Okay. And we'll go ahead and build and deploy this. Okay, that looks like the solution was deployed and the features were activated, so we'll launch our team site. We'll add this web part to our team site. We'll get rid of the old web part that was on there. Okay, I'm going to edit this page. And we're going to add our web part that we just made. It's our list demos, list viewer web part, so we'll add that. Save that. So in this site, we just went ahead and iterated through all the lists, and we wrote out the title and then the ID, which is a GUID value for each list. So now, what we're going to do, I'm going to add some more code to our project. So here I'm going to grab the announcements list. Actually, in fact, I don't believe I have an announcements list in here because it's not showing up here. So let's just add that to our site. And we'll call it announcements. Okay, so here's our announcements list. Great. Now we'll write some code to get a handle on that list. So right now we're using the indexer of the SP list item collection, or I'm sorry, the SP list collection, and we're passing in a string so it knows to do a lookup by title of the list. And then let's go ahead and add a new literal control to the page. And then we'll just write out how many announcements we have, which should be 0. So I could put item count here, or I could put items dot count, but that's not a best practice, because what that means is it needs to actually iterate, the object model is going to iterate through every single item in that list. So if I had 10,000 announcements, it would have to iterate through all those and grab the count. A better way to do it is just use item count. So that way that's stored in the database as an aggregate, and so it doesn't need to do that iteration, because every time you iterate through the whole list, you're putting a lot of strain on your back-end resources like your SQL Server. And we'll just add a line break here as well. I forgot the add method. Okay. This code is going to access the announcements list. It'll tell us the number of items in the list. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that page and let's see, I'll grab another list. Let's grab I have a vendors list in here that I've uploaded, so I'll just go grab that. And actually, I want the GUID of that list. So I want to demonstrate using the GUID indexer. So we'll say splist. What was the list name? Vendors, okay. So we'll add another literal control, and we'll say vendors, and we'll just show the default new form URL. Okay, so let's go ahead and deploy this. Let's go back to our code. And actually, we don't want this to happen while this is iterating, so let's take this out of here. Let's put this after the for each loop. It's a little bit better. Let's just deploy that again. Okay, so now we have our announcements item count showing up here. But it looks like we're not getting anything for our vendors list. So let's just put a breakpoint here and see what's going on. Let's refresh this page. Okay, we have a good valid instance of the vendors list. And this default new form URL is null, so that's why we're not seeing anything. So let's just add a different property. Let's look at the default display form URL. Let's try that. While that's working, we're going to add some code. So another way to get lists is so let's just add some spaces in here. Let's get vendors. Let's get the vendors list. We'll call it vendors2 equals web.lists. Actually, I'm sorry, we'll try the GetList method. And we'll put in the URL of the default display form URL. And then we'll add another literal control to the page. Another page break. Okay, let's see how we're doing on this page. Okay, we're still not getting anything for that. Let's try a different one. How about we'll use the default view URL. And we'll just compile that, deploy it. Let's refresh the page. So if we get an error here, that means that we're trying to get a list with a blank URL. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so now we're getting the default view URL, and it looks like that vendors list has two content types. So this code as well, it's working now, but what we were able to see is different ways of getting lists. So we iterated the list collection, then we used the title indexer for the SP list collection, and we used the GUID indexer. And then we used the GetList method of the SP web. We just passed in the default view URL. Any URL that has the list in it, even if it's pointing to default view or an edit page, whatever, as long as it has part of the list URL in it, this will work. And in fact, it did. We were able to get the handle on that vendors list and we were able to print out the content types. So in addition to the ways that we have looked at creating lists, we've done that declaratively. We can also do programmatically by calling the add method of the web's lists collection. And this method has several overloads that support creation of the list and document libraries, as the out-of-the-box ones, as well as those with custom definitions. So when we do that, we need to set the title, the description, the template. So for the template would be what list template it is. So like the generic list template for a custom list would be 100, and there are other ones like the announcements, contacts. Those all have generic list templates. And if you don't know what those are, you can look them up. You can just go into the 15 Hive. I mean, you can look it up online. There's plenty of people that have blogged about what pages just listing all those numbers. But if you wanted to, you could just go in the 15 Hive and drill into those features, and you'll be able to find them in the feature XML files as well, in the elements files. And then if you're creating an external list, so an external list, that has to do with the business connectivity services. And so we're not going to cover that right now, but if you're creating an external list pointing to an external data source, then you would need to add that. So when you call add on the list collection, it's not going to return you the list. It's just going to return you the ID of the list, which is a GUID, the Global Unique Identifier. And then what you do is once you get that GUID, then you get an instance of the new list from the SP list collection using the GUID indexer. So you just pass that GUID into the indexer, and then it retrieves the instance of the new list, and then you can use it from there. And then once you have it, then you will want to set additional properties on the list. Like maybe you want to set the default view or add fields to it, that type of thing. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and go back into Visual Studio and create lists with server code. So I'm going back into the site, and I have some sample data that I loaded up into the site. So I actually added a vendors list. And so this has a title, full name, primary phone. And if we go to the settings, it's using a content type called vendor. And the vendor has the same field. So it's a vendor list based on the vendor content type. So what we're going to do is we already have we have our solution package here, and we already have a feature. So sometimes a common thing that you might be doing in a feature event receiver when a feature is activated is to create a list. First, what we need to do is add an event receiver. So we've added an event receiver. I'm going to uncomment the feature activated. Let's get rid of the uncomment comment. And we'll uncomment the deactivating as well. So in the feature activated, we're going to go ahead and create a list. So let me go ahead and get the SP site. We can get a handle on the SP site from the properties that are passed into this feature receiver. So the properties of the feature, we want the feature and we want its parent. So the parent, let's go back and look just to double check. But this feature is scoped at the site level. So it's a site collection feature. So that means that this is parent is going to be an SP site. Oops, I forgot equals. Now, if that was scoped at the web level, then we would be getting an SP web back, and we would just have to cast to that. So our web is that we care about. We're going to work on the root web here. Whoops. No, actually, we don't even need this. Let's just remove that. We can use site.rootweb. So we'll add the products list. Description, we'll call list of products. List template. That's an enumeration. And so we want generic list. So we don't have to memorize that number. That's kind of nice. And if we look this up, we'll see that generic list is 100. So that's just a more convenient, more readable way to create this. And then we need to get the actual list, the actual handle to the list. We use the GUID that we got back. I'll set a property on it. We'll make it show up on the quick launch. Then we need to update it. So you always need to call update whenever you're modifying a list or a list item. If you don't call update, then whatever changes you made in the object model, they're not going to get saved. It's not going to persist. So next thing I'm going to do is we're going to keep deploying the solution multiple times as we're going to keep extending and testing this code. I don't want to run into errors where the list already exists. So for this purpose, I'm going to go ahead and when the feature deactivates, I'm just going to delete the list because we're going to be adding different functionality to it. In fact, I'm just going to copy this code here. And we'll wrap this in the try catch just in case we deleted it from the UI. So when we try to delete it, but it's not there, or if we try to access it and it's not there, then we would get an exception. So this is just kind of a shorthand way of doing it. We're not going to worry about what exception, if it comes up, we're not going to. Typically, we would log that somewhere, but I'm not going to worry about it. So We'll just leave that as is. And I'm going to go ahead and build the solution. I'm going to deploy it. So let's open up our site. That feature was activated when we deployed the solution. So that means that feature event receiver code, it did execute. And in fact, the way we can prove that is that the products list that we just created is showing up on the quick launch because we set it to show up on the quick launch. So there's our list. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to bind a content type to our list. So I already have a content type. Let me just verify that it exists. Let me go to Site Settings and Site Content Types. And here's my product content type. So I do have that. That's been pre-configured. So now I can add more code. So we'll say products. First we need to enable content types on the list in order to associate it. And then we're going to add the product content type. To get to the content types, they actually live in the root web. So they're not part, because remember, the site collection, all it is a container, and it doesn't hold any of the data for the site. So it actually lives in the root web of the site collection. And so now we have associated. Now we need to call update to make sure that that content type is added. But right now, if we go back to the products list and if we go to settings, actually, easier way to say that, look at this is if we go to items, new item, this tells me right here that this is the default content type, the item content type, which is for every custom list, that's what it's going to be. But we don't want it to be that. We've added a content type called product, and we don't really care about the item content type anymore. So what we need to do is just remove that content type from the list. So we know that that's the first content type. So we'll just access it by its indexer and delete it. And then we'll also update the products list too. And I'm going to go ahead and build this again. I'll deploy it again. Okay, that succeeded. So let's open up the site. Okay, so now let's go to the products list and go to the list settings. And notice now we enable content types, so that turns this on right here in the UI, so the content types show up. And the item content type is no longer there, but we do have the product content type. because we added it. We deleted the item content type. So if we go back to list and we add a new item, now we're going to see the fields for product content type. Okay, so we haven't talked about views yet, programmatically changing those, but we notice how we added this, but their default view is still showing only the title. But if we click this, we can see the data is there. Each SharePoint list can have one or more views, and you access the list views via the views property on the SP list object. That views property it's an SP view collection, and each instance of SP view has many properties. So view fields, that's the fields that show up in the UI in whatever order they've been set in the view fields property. And then the query, that's used to do any filtering that you want to have in your view. And you can use sorting if you want your view to be sorted in a certain way. Same thing with grouping, aggregations. You can set a row limit, so maybe you only want to display 20 items in your view. So right now we'll go ahead and we'll continue working in the project that we've been working in, and we'll modify the all items view to include the vendor and quantity fields from the product content type. Okay, we're back in our feature receiver now, the feature activated method, and we're going to go ahead and update the default view. So I'm going to need to get an instance of that view. So one way I could do it is I could actually put in the name of the view, and I could go and I could actually use Server Explorer. So I'm going to take a look at Server Explorer and just drill down into that. So I'll drill down into the products list, go into the views, and here's the all items view. So I could hit F4, that'll bring the properties up, and then I can go down to check the properties on it, and I can get the ID of it if I want, or I can get the title. This views collection that's on the lists, it works the same way. Oops, I'm sorry. This views collection right here, it works the same way. So let's put IntelliSense on it. Same way as the list. So I can either pass it a GUID, actually a numeric index, or the title. So if I could put all items in there, that would work. I could also do this. I could say, since I know that all items is, all I really care about is the default view that's showing up in the UI, that's the one I want to fix, I could just say default view. So I could just do that to get a handle on it. So now that I have a handle to the view, what I want to do is I want to delete the current fields that it has. So I'm going to go to the view fields property, and I'm going to call delete all on it. I'm basically going to start over. And now I need to figure out what fields I want to put in there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to call products view, dot view fields dot add, and you can either take a field, the name of a field, or just the field itself. So for right now, just leave it like that. So put an empty string in there. We want the title to show up first, but most lists have 3 different fields with the display name of title. So each title field has a unique static name. So the title that includes the drop-down menu, which is also known as the edit control block, that has a static name of link title. And so we can actually see that if I go into Server Manager, Server Explorer that is, and I'm going to go into the products list and go to the fields. Let's expand this a little bit. You see there's 3 title fields here. That's their display name. But if I hit F4, if I go to I want to find the static name. So this one is link title. This one is just title. And that one is link title, no menu. Actually, that static name is title. Yeah, this is link title, no menu. So that's not going to show menu. The one I want to have is link title. So I'll just copy that. And then the other fields I know from the content type. So let me just copy and paste here. I know the other field name is vendor. And the last field I want to show is the quantity. And then, since we're modifying this view, following the same pattern as all the other SharePoint objects, is we need to update it. And we'll go ahead and deploy the solution now. Okay, that deployed, so let's go ahead and launch our team site in the browser. Okay, and we're going to go to our products list. And now you'll notice it's showing all 3 fields, whereas before it was just showing title. This is because we updated our view, so now we add an item here. Save that. Now we're seeing all the data show up.